Another nation absorbed into the blob of the empire. Bashar al-Assad has fled to Moscow, where he has reportedly been granted asylum by Russia. The al-Qaeda affiliates who drove him out have declared victory for the Mujahideen in Damascus. Both Biden and Netanyahu have publicly taken credit for assisting in the regime change, and of course Turkey's Erdogan deserves a heavy share of credit as well. And yet there's still a bit of a taboo in mainstream Western discourse around calling this a regime change operation backed by the US and its allies. We're all meant to pretend this was a 100% organic uprising, driven solely and exclusively by the people of Syria, despite years and years of evidence to the contrary. We are meant to pretend this is the case even after we just watched the U.S. power alliance crush Syria using proxy warfare, starvation sanctions, constant bombing operations, and a military occupation explicitly designed to cut Syria off from oil and wheat in order to prevent its reconstruction after the Western-backed civil war. People get mad at you for saying this, but it's true. It's just a fact that major world events do not occur independently of the actions of the major world powers who have a vested interest in their outcomes. If my saying this makes you feel uncomfortable, that discomfort is called cognitive dissonance. It's what being wrong feels like. Maybe it bothers you when people point out the involvement of the U.S. power alliance in Syria. And maybe you would prefer to believe that a plucky band of heroic freedom fighters bravely overthrew an evil supervillain dictator all on their own like some Hollywood movie. But real life doesn't move in accordance with your preferences. In real life, the globe-spanning empire that is centralized around the United States will reliably be deeply involved in such events. When I say this, you may want to believe I am denying the agency of Syrians, and that denying agency is the worst sin a person can possibly commit. But nothing I am saying actually contradicts the idea that Syrians have their own agency. Obviously, there were many Syrians who wanted Assad gone, and obviously there were many people who had their own reasons for fighting him which had nothing to do with the U.S. empire. There is no contradiction between this obvious fact and the well-documented reality that the U.S. centralized power structure has been balls deep in Syria from the very beginning of the violence in 2011, and that its involvement led to the events we are seeing today. The claim isn't that the U.S. empire controlled the minds of Syrians and forced them to turn against their government with no agency of their own. The claim is that the empire put a big fat thumb on the scale to ensure that one group of Syrians got their way instead of a different group. You can argue that Western regime change interventionism will lead to positive results this time, so long as you're prepared to ignore mountains of historical evidence consistently demonstrating the opposite. But what you cannot do on any rational basis is deny that Western regime change interventionism occurred in Syria. Western liberalism is funny in that its adherents lean heavily on their ability to psychologically compartmentalize away from the actions of the Western Empire, and indeed away from the very existence of that empire. The Western liberal lives in an imaginary alternate universe where Western powers pretty much mind their own business, and Western leaders passively watch violence and destruction unfold around the world whilst pleading for peace and diplomacy from their podiums. They pretend the empire does not exist, and that it is only by pure coincidence that conflicts, coups, and uprisings keep occurring in ways which favor the strategic interests of Washington. In reality, it is impossible to understand what's going on in the world unless you understand that the U.S. is the hub of an undeclared empire which has been working tirelessly to bring the global population under a single power umbrella over which it presides. The few countries who have successfully resisted being absorbed into the imperial blob are the official bad guys we Westerners are all trained to hate: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a few socialist states in Latin America. I used to include Syria in this list, but that's over now. Syria has been absorbed into the blob of the empire. And tomorrow, the imperial blob will move its crosshairs on to the next unabsorbed nation. That's the underlying dynamic behind all the major conflicts on Earth. This dynamic gets redacted from the mainstream Western worldview with the assistance of the Western propaganda services known as the mass media, as well as the Western indoctrination system known as schooling. This dynamic is redacted from our worldview and hidden from our attention by the plutocrats and empire managers who work to manipulate our information systems, because otherwise we would realize that the U.S. empire is the most tyrannical and abusive power structure on this planet today. And it unquestionably is. No other power structure has spent the 21st century killing people by the millions in wars of aggression, while circling the planet with hundreds of military bases and working continuously to crush any group which opposes its dictates anywhere on Earth. Not China, not Russia, not Iran, not Cuba, not Bashar al-Assad. Only the U.S. empire has been tyrannizing and abusing the world to this extent in modern times. And now the imperial blob rolls on to absorb its next target, having grown one Syria-sized increment larger after spending years digesting that nation via proxy warfare, starvation sanctions, relentless bombing campaigns from Israel, and a military occupation designed to steal its food and fuel. Our world cannot know peace as long as we are ruled by an empire that is fueled by endless rivers of human blood. Here's hoping the end of that empire comes sooner rather than later.